Welcome back to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify the complex frameworks and, frankly, the hidden gears that govern global events. Whether you're watching the evening news or reading up on historical conflicts, there are these massive, invisible forces at play. We're going to break those down step by step to make these huge concepts crystal clear for you.
Right off the bat, I want to pose a really crucial question to you. Why do nations cooperate? And why do they go to war? It's the ultimate high-stakes puzzle, right? We aren't just talking about abstract, dusty theories today. We're talking about the real-world decisions that shape our borders, our economies, and literally our daily lives. So keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer, because every single thing we cover is essentially an attempt to answer it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, what exactly is international relations? Second, the scope and key actors. Third, the 3 levels of analysis. Fourth, the origins and decolonization. And finally, number 5, the realist theory. Let's get into it. Part 1. What is international relations? So let's clear up a really common misconception right away. People often use international relations and international politics interchangeably, but they aren't the same thing. Think of international relations as the complete, thriving global ecosystem. It encompasses the whole shebang: trade agreements, cultural exchanges, social movements, diplomatic ties, all of it. It's broad. International politics, though, that is just a specific segment within that ecosystem. It is hyper-focused on the struggle for political power and authority. If international relations is the entire jungle, international politics is that specific predator-prey struggle for dominance happening right in the middle of it. Moving on to Part 2, Scope and Key Actors. So who actually gets to play in this massive global arena? Well, historically, we only looked at the state itself and its foreign policy. But today, the scope of IR has absolutely exploded. States are now sharing the stage with some incredibly influential non-state actors. We're talking massive multinational corporations and NGOs. Plus, we've got to account for huge international organizations like the UN and the IMF. And, perhaps most importantly, the scope today includes pressing global issues. Things like climate change, pandemics, refugee crises, issues that, frankly, simply do not care about traditional borders. This crowded stage illustrates just how interconnected our modern world truly is. When multinational corporations can impact multiple economies all at once, or when global organizations influence a nation's sovereignty, we start to realize that this whole system is built on incredibly complex, intertwined mutual interests and, countless handshake agreements. Which brings us to Part 3, the 3 levels of analysis.
With so many moving parts, scholars rely on a sort of analytical toolbox to make sense of world events without getting totally overwhelmed. Think of it like zooming in and out on a camera. At the most zoomed-in level, the individual, we look at how a specific leader's personality, their ideology, or even just their personal decisions steer global events. Now zoom out a bit to the state level. Here, we examine how a country's internal setup, like, say, whether it's a democracy that prioritizes peace, affects its external actions. Finally, zoom all the way out to the system level. We aren't looking at single leaders or individual countries anymore. We're looking at the entire global balance of power. A perfect example would be how the world was divided into 2 competing blocks during the Cold War. It really is all about which lens you choose to look through.
All right, Part 4, Origins of the Discipline. So, where did the formal study of all these interactions actually come from? Well, scholars debate the exact origins quite a bit. Some argue that IR has been around since the ancient era, pointing to early warfare, treaties, and ancient diplomacy. Others point firmly to the year 1648 and the Treaty of Westphalia, which essentially birthed the modern nation-state system by officially recognizing sovereign borders. But if we're talking about it as a formal academic discipline taught in universities, we really have to look to the 20th century. In 1919, right after the absolute devastation of the First World War, we experienced what scholars call the Big Bang of international relations. Universities officially began teaching IR. And why then? Because the destruction was just so profound that the world desperately needed to understand the structural causes of war, purely to prevent something that horrific from ever happening again. So the academic discipline was literally born out of a desperate desire for world peace. Moving to Part 5, Decolonial and Indian Perspectives. Now here's a somewhat provocative thought for you. For centuries, the traditional view of international relations was heavily dominated by Western history and ideologies. It was very Eurocentric. But after World War II, a massive shift occurred: decolonization. As colonial rule ended and brand new independent nations emerged across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the global balance of power completely shifted. Suddenly, there was this necessary demand for a decolonial perspective. We needed a framework that finally brought the civilizational values and the voices of the rest of the globe into the academic conversation. To give you an idea, just look at how incorporating Indian civilizational values fundamentally shifts how we view global cooperation. Take the ancient concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which beautifully translates to the world is one family. When you inject this, along with principles like ahimsa, or nonviolence, into international relations, you're providing entirely new cooperative frameworks for global peace that existed way outside the traditional European viewpoints. It totally changes the paradigm from a state of pure competition to one of genuine coexistence. And finally, Part 6, the realist theory. So, if cooperative concepts like the world is one family are out there, why is our global stage still so defined by conflict? Well, that brings us to realism. This is the dominant and honestly pretty gritty theory of international politics. Realism argues that the world system is fundamentally anarchic. That doesn't mean chaos. It means there is no supreme global authority. There's no world police force to keep everyone in line. Because of this, states are the main actors, and they have to rely entirely on themselves. Therefore, they are driven purely by national interest, power, and competition simply to survive. In this view, power is the absolute ultimate currency. Realism strips away the idealism entirely. I mean, think of Machiavelli's famous work, The Prince. He argued that leaders absolutely must make tough, ruthless decisions to maintain their state's power. In the harsh, unforgiving arena of international politics, power and authority are vastly more significant than morality. If you are too focused on being morally perfect, a less scrupulous state might just overpower you. For a realist, survival always comes first. And this kind of ruthless pragmatism builds perfectly on the ideas of Thomas Hobbes. He had a rather, let's say, dark view of inherently selfish human nature. He believed that life in a natural state, without a governing authority, is full of fear, insecurity, and conflict. Modern realist scholars look at that quote and say, exactly, that perfectly mirrors the tense arena of international politics. Because there's no supreme world government, states are always existing in this underlying state of fear and insecurity, just constantly trying to balance power against one another. All of his history and philosophy really culminated in the 20th century with Hans Jain Morgenthau, who is basically the foremost theorist of modern realism. In his massively influential book, Politics Among Nations, he cemented these ideas into core academic principles. He basically declared that international politics is governed by objective laws with deep roots in human nature. And most importantly, he argued that a state's national interest must always be defined and understood in terms of power. Simply put, you just can't secure your interests if you don't have the power to back them up. Which brings us to our final provocative thought for this explainer. We just talked about how the modern state system, with its intense focus on sovereign borders, began way back with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. But take a look around today. We live in an age of hyper-rapid globalization. We have massive multinational corporations holding more economic power than some entire countries, and global organizations routinely influencing state sovereignty. So I'm going to leave you with this to ponder. Can that 1648 Westphalian system actually survive in our modern, deeply interconnected world? Keep that question in mind the very next time you read the news. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today.